Good morning to everyone. Are you still awake with energy? No, I don't think so. Are you still with energy? Okay. Let's move on. Okay. This presentation is about migrating a Spring Boot application into a Quarkus application. Who knows what Quarkus is? So most of you. Okay. Basically, the presentation tries to move a given project from Spring Boot that was taking around 4 seconds to start into something that will run in 260 milliseconds. During my presentation, I show a lot of retro games that if you can guess which are the names of those games, and then I assume that you are going to make questions or rate this presentation with Slido. I would love if you can add a comment with the names for those games, and then I will tweet who is the one that has the most correct answers. So let's start. I'm Jonathan. I'm Java champion since 2020, and I am also part of the Barcelona Java community, and also organizer of JVCN and DevVCN conferences in Barcelona. I've been speaker in several conferences, but this is my first time in GeeCON Krakow. I was last year in GeeCON Prague, and now I'm happy to be here in Poland, my first time. I've been developer for more than 30 years in several languages. One of the languages that I loved the most was Delphi. Has anybody used Delphi? Okay. The other day I received a job request for working as a Delphi developer. I didn't know that they are still accepting people. I assume that somebody retired. I've also worked for Red Hat, Tetrate, and Ocado Technology, but now I'm working as a developer advocate for Sonar. This talk is about a challenge that I accepted when someone said, okay, what would be to migrate an existing application? Because yes, we know that Quarkus, you can create greenfield applications, but what if we want to migrate a current application? So I said, yeah, challenge accepted. I work for Sonar, that it is the company behind SonarQube. Anybody doesn't know what it is, SonarQube? Perfect. SonarQube is a tool to statically analyze code and will check if you have issues, vulnerabilities, or bad code. Sonar has like 3 main products. SonarLint, that it is free IDE plugin. SonarQube, that is also free on the community edition, that you can download and run it on your premises, or Sonar Cloud, that is the hosted version, and it's also free for open source projects. Sonar tools are detecting more than 30 languages at the same time, even infrastructure as code, and they have integration with several DevOps platforms. I brought some swag from Sonar, so socks, glass cleaners, and stickers and pens, so after the talk, please come and take them. Okay, so this is the agenda for the presentation. Remember that if you want to ask things or just simply add comments, slido.com and GeeCON, room 11. And this is the QR for the slides if you want to check them as I'm talking. So first I'm going to introduce which are the expectations that you can have of this presentation and which are mine. Then I will explain why I decided to migrate a project. And I will introduce what is Quarkus for those of you that don't know what it is. Also, GraalVM is very, very connected to Quarkus. And finally, I will describe which is the project to migrate and the steps to migrate from Spring Boot. And finally, I will give you a matrix with a performance comparative, so the startup time between Spring Boot and Quarkus. So basically, this presentation is only my opinion. I'm not here to teach anyone anything. Just I'm here to share my experience. You could have a better one, but this is mine. This is also something that works. You can run it. So it's not only in theory, so it runs. But if you are following the series The Mandalorian, this is not the way. So this is only one way of doing things. And these are the two versions of Spring and Quarkus, the latest ones. And what I expect from this presentation? Well, I don't have a lot of expectations, but I have one, that it is to light sparkle of curiosity on you to check that there are other things in the world more than Spring. So the world doesn't end on Spring. There are Quarkus, Micronaut, Elidon, and other things that you can explore, especially if you want to go ahead of time compilation. So what I decided to migrate? Well, I've been working also with Spring for several years, and my experience was that it was easy to create things. They abstract a lot of things, and then they make it easy for you to develop. But in my case, it took ages to start every application. Also, it took a lot of memory. So it was super big. I remember in one particular company that the application took like half an hour to start. So it was heavy. And also, this is a particular thing. I didn't like that with Spring, there are lots of things happening under the hood. So if you check the log, you see a lot of things starting that you didn't expect. And I heard about Quarkus, this new thing, at that time, that they claimed that it was easy to create applications, that it was fast to start, and that it didn't have a high memory footprint, but also that it had a very close integration with GraalVM. Who doesn't know what it is, GraalVM? OK. So GraalVM, I will explain it later, but it's something that allows your application to be compiled into a native artifact where you don't need the JVM to be installed to run your application. So, and one of the highlights with GraalVM compiled applications is that they take, they are super fast to start, and that they consume very few memory. Very little memory. So if we can have an application that it is fast enough and that it consumes less memory, then we can increment the cluster density, especially if we are going to Kubernetes or cloud. We can have more applications per cluster with the same resources than before. So let's start with a brief description of what is Quarkus. I invested a lot of money on this game, I remember. So what is Quarkus? Basically, it's a framework that will allow you to create applications that are more Kubernetes friendly. So it's a Kubernetes native framework. You can use Quarkus with Java, Scala, or Kotlin, so it's not only Java. But the thing is that you can run applications either on the JVM or as a native artifact if you use GraalVM. Just because one of the main points of Quarkus, everything that it is ahead of time compilation, what they do is they put some of the effort that, in this case, Spring is doing in runtime, discovering a lot of things. They put this effort on compile time. So usually, it takes more time to compile, but it's way faster on runtime because a lot of things are already done. And one of the things that I like the most from Quarkus is that you don't need to learn new tricks. So it's based on open source libraries that probably you have been using in the past. They are optimized to be used by Quarkus, reducing reflection, basically, and optimizing it. And with that, you simply use what you have been using, and that's it. Definitely, it's way faster to start Quarkus, also consumes less memory. They have a focus on making it easy to code with Quarkus. And you will see that it's not, you don't need to learn lots of things. It's open source, that for me it's very, very important. And there's a huge team behind Quarkus that they are creating new versions every 2 weeks. So it's very interesting, it's very alive. And there are tons of extensions for Quarkus. So lots and lots of libraries are already ported to Quarkus. At this moment, there are more than 600 libraries that you can use with Quarkus. So you can go to the website, Quarkus website, and you will find those extensions. And it's going to be, well, unlikely that you are not going to find the library that you're using that hasn't been optimized for Quarkus. Let's say, I don't know, Kafka or Camel or Flyway or I don't know. There are lots of them that you can use with Quarkus. Obviously, to work with Quarkus, you need a library that has been optimized for Quarkus if you want to go to a native artifact. The evolution, well, they started in 2018, but they have been creating lots of versions. And the latest is 3.10. I think it was released in May this year. And basically, the key point is that for a regular application that takes in a traditional framework, you can guess which is that framework, it takes more than 136 megabytes. But then if we go to Quarkus, it's half of it. But if we go to Quarkus native, it's only 12 megabytes. I'm going to say now that in order to go from a Quarkus JVM application to a native one, you only need to add -p native on the command line, and that's it. You don't have to touch your code. But also in startup time, you see that one thing took more than 4 seconds, and if we go to native, it's 16 milliseconds. So it's a lot of improvement here. The project, as I said, it's very alive, more than 800 committers, and constantly improving with new features. They are up to date with AI, so they have modules for Lang4Chain, or LangChain for Java, sorry. So they are very updated. And even people can contribute creating extensions for them in the Quarkiverse hub. So what it is to code with Quarkus? So basically, you add the dependencies in the POM, and that's it. So you use, in this case, JAX-RS, and you create a REST endpoint. That's it. It's very easy to start creating something with Quarkus. You don't have to use new Quarkus things in your code. In order to have beans, you use the CDI spec, and that's it. Again, you don't need to learn new tricks. For testing, well, with testing, Quarkus created new annotations that are, well, spinning the life cycle for your test, and also connecting with Quarkus resources in order for you to have or test containers connected, or resources that are started during the life cycle of your test. And in order to create command line applications, very easy also. The extension is PicoCli, and you use it very, very easy with the command line annotation, and that's it. In order to compile a Quarkus application, it's using the Maven plugin, and that's it. You compile it regularly, or you can just use Quarkus dev phase in order to start the application, and it will check constantly if anything changes in your code in order to spin again the resources needed. So you can test and change the code without having to recompile all the code. But also you can do it with a remote deployment. So you can have an application deployed on Kubernetes, and then you will have the same experience. Every time that you touch your code, it will be redeployed automatically, and then you can test it very easily. And as I said, you can just simply say, OK, I want a native artifact, and very easy. So it's an argument in the command line, and that's it. But also, it has a CLI. If you want, you can just download the Quarkus CLI. And you can install it with, well, in my case, I use SDK-man, but you can use JBang or Homebrew to install it. And it will allow you to create applications, to create command line applications, or even extensions, very easy from the command line. Build them using the JVM or creating a container image or even a native artifact. You also can run it in development mode. As I said, every time that you touch your code, it will be redeployed, or even make it, well, you test your application, but also you can run it in interactive mode where you have like command line that you can inspect what is happening in the logs and everything. And finally, you can deploy into Kubernetes or OpenShift or in Knative or even in a local cluster if you are using Kind or Minikube. And it's very easy. You just simply use Quarkus create app, and that's it. It will create the whole infrastructure, the whole tree, or Quarkus dep or Quarkus deploy Kubernetes. It's very easy to use the command line. And then it abstracts you from the more complicated Maven command line. But one of the key points that I told you before is that it can be used to compile to native artifacts. But for that, we need something else. We need GraalVM, or in this case, Mandrel. GraalVM is something that allows you to take your, in this case, for our particular use case, your Java code, and it will compile it to a native executable. It also has, it can interpret different languages, and it will compile using the ahead of time compilation. It will compile into a native artifact. In the end, for you, it's like using a Java JDK, so you compile and you use it. With Quarkus, it's even easier because what it will do is it will download the container image for you. It will run Mandrel for you, will compile the native artifact, and that's it. So you don't have to consider installing GraalVM or Mandrel. With GraalVM, if we have this piece of code, this is a hello world, it's very easy. We install, in this case, the Graal JDK. We install also the native image plugin for Graal. And finally, we compiled the Java class. And then we create the native image. And we execute it as a regular command executable. It takes a lot of time in order to compile it. But once it's compiled, then it's super fast to start. But Quarkus decided to fork from GraalVM in order to not depend on the Oracle decisions. So they forked it to Mandrel. Mandrel has some differences, or some. It's a subset of things compared to GraalVM. Use OpenJDK instead of the Labs JDK from Oracle. It's only focused on Java, so it doesn't have like the polyglot layer. Has a subset of GraalVM features. So I said no truffle, and no so long that it is an LLVM for other languages. And it has a default image that comes from Red Hat. So in the end, it's a GraalVM for Red Hat. So it has a very subset of things from Mandrel, some from Graal. But for our use case, it's perfect. With this game, I could never pass the first stage. It was crazy, but I played a lot. So in our case, this project is the Spring Pet Clinic REST. It's very easy. It has it's a REST with a few entities, and yeah, not complicated, but it was perfect for this example. Why? Because it has the common Spring libraries, and these are the correspondent Quarkus libraries, from Spring Data to Panache, Web to JAX-RS. Well, the only thing that changes is that with Quarkus, we don't have Spring aspect-oriented programming. So, well, we will see how we can fix not having AOP. So the migration steps, basically, in order to change to Quarkus, instead of using the auto-wired annotation, well, basically you could or you should use the inject, that it is the standard one. In case you use the auto-wired, then for Quarkus, it's just to change to inject. It's easy. It's more like a string replace with the import and the annotation. And it's very easy, and it has more or less the same result. Also with auto-injection on constructors, it's lazy by default. So it's easy and fast to do it. With JPA repositories, well, it's to change the dependency to the class. And in my case, I needed to go to the Panache repository base just to not change the type for the identity. In this case, was integer, but by default is a long. So, but it's the same. It will give us the same methods to find, persist, delete, or list. The only problem is that we don't have derived methods. So those methods that you could use to find by name, by age, we don't have them. With the Spring REST, well, it's a matter of changing to JAX-RS and replacing the annotations. But if you are using the request mapping, that it is one annotation that has all the attributes on it, then you need to break it down into the different annotations for JAX-RS. With security, well, we are going to move to Quarkus security. And the only thing is that Quarkus security does not allow to use expressions. So with the Spring, you have has role, and then we specify the role. With Quarkus, we need to specify which are the roles in a list. But well, it was not a big problem in this case. In this project, the security is persisted in a database. And in order to do that with Quarkus, we went to Elytron JDBC, and that's it. We simply configure the security in the database, and it's in a properties file. We configure this, and that's it. Also, we add the dependency, and it works. With cross-origin, again, it's easy. We only have to add these two properties in the properties file, and that's it. But the thing is that with Spring, you could configure the course for endpoint, but with Quarkus, at least I didn't find the way to do it, so it's globally on or off. With metrics, in this Spring project, it was using AOP in order to get metrics from the methods that are connecting to the database. So for those that are using the repository, with AOP, it was putting like two different, so a timer before and then checking the time that has passed after the method. We don't have that with Quarkus, so we should have to create this with timed and counted annotations, and then we can just have the same. But we should annotate all the methods that are doing this. And by default, it's not using the micrometer compatibility, so it's using a different result. But we can use a property in order to change, which is the way that Quarkus is showing this information. But instead of using AOP that was doing an around and having this method that it's taking the time, we need to use again these annotations in order to do the same, okay? But for each method, with AOP you can have an expression, and this will affect a lot of classes and a lot of methods. But with Quarkus we don't have that, so we should have to annotate all the repository methods that are doing this. But there is a way of not having to do this. That it is to add a property in the properties file that it is saying, hey, Hibernate, give me metrics. And without doing anything else, we will have all the Hibernate metrics in our metrics file. So even having more information than before, and without having to change the code. With the validation for our beans, we needed to change from Spring validation to Hibernate validation. The syntax is super similar, but yes, we needed to change the code in order to, well, to say, okay, if this is not correct, then raise an exception on if the values for the bean are not correct. For Swagger, it's also easy for Quarkus because you can just simply have an open API definition annotation in the application class, and then you will have the Swagger definition for all your REST endpoints, or you can have it in the properties file, and then you configure Swagger. The only thing that it was different is that for Spring, you can specify that for each endpoint. Therefore, you can hide some endpoints from the Swagger definition. But with Quarkus, I didn't find the way to do it. With local caching, was the same. It's a different dependency, but it's very, very similar. It's about changing the annotation and also configuring it in the properties file, because now Quarkus is using caffeine, but it's very similar, so no problems here. With testing, that was more difficult. With testing, we need to change everything, because for Spring, we were using mock-MVC, and for Quarkus, we need to use rest assured that the code is completely different. I prefer the rest assured one. For me, it's more clear. But if you are using mock-MVC, you need to change it completely. And in this case, in order to test the security for the methods, with Spring, you can specify which is the role that is allowed to run a method. But with the Spring, we needed to do it at the level of user. So then you need to create a test user for every role that you want to test. That was the difference. With test resources, so with the Spring, it was starting an H2 in-memory database in order to test. For Quarkus, you can do it the same with Quarkus test resource, and it will start an H2 database connected to the lifecycle of your test. There are other ways. I preferred using test containers, that it is spinning a real application with Docker, and it is connected to your test lifecycle. But in this case, was using Quarkus test resource in order to do the same as with Spring. And in order to test mocks, well, using the inject mock in our tests, and it was fine. So not a big deal here, too. So at this point, forget everything that I said. So basically, if you want to migrate a Spring application to Quarkus, don't do what I said. Just use the Spring extensions. So Quarkus has Spring extensions that what they are doing is changing the implementation, but not the interface. So in that case, you have your code the same as it is now. Your code thinks it is using Spring, but it's not. It is using Quarkus. But implementations that are fulfilling the Spring interface. There are Spring extensions for a lot of things, dependency injection, web API, data JPA, I don't know, security, cache, properties. So you have extensions for a lot of things. Reality is, okay, this is true, but you need to check if you are using something that it is not covered by the Spring extension. It could be that you are using something that the Spring extension is not covering. So we have the Spring Web extension that you are using exactly the same annotations as it is, they are in Spring. Don't need to touch anything, just simply to change the dependencies in the POM, and that's it. With the dependency injection, it's the same, and you use exactly the same annotations, everything as it was Spring. That's it. Even with the Spring Data extension, we can use derived methods. So we can use the find by, because it will convert to the Quarkus code. So no need to change your code if you are coming from Spring, just to change to Quarkus. With security, the same. And now in this case, we still have expression language in order to check for the security for the methods. So what I did was I took the Spring REST pet project, and I simply converted it into Quarkus, and then into Quarkus using Spring extensions. And basically, well, in build time, there's a difference. As I said, using GraalVM or Mandrel, it takes way more time than in JVM. So it's 3 minutes compared to 13 seconds or 10 seconds. It also takes way more memory in order to, so the file, it takes, it's bigger with the native one. But I would say that usually we don't care that much in build time, especially if we have microservices, so we don't have applications with super long build time. But in boot time, if we want to go to scale fast and to have more applications with horizontal scaling in a cluster, the thing is that with the Spring Boot, it takes around 4 seconds. Well, it's a lot. If you have to start a pod in Kubernetes and wait for 4 seconds to give the first response, it's a lot. Especially if you are scaling up very, very often. With Quarkus, we are going to half of it, or less than half of it. But if we do this dash the native in the command line, the thing is that we are converting almost 4 seconds to less than 2 seconds, so half of it. But then we move to 260 milliseconds. So there's a huge difference. And probably now we can consider on using a Java application as a Amazon Lambda. In the past, having to wait 4 seconds, or well, yeah, you can use the warm-up from Amazon. But if you have like different, the warm-up that boots an application and then it keeps in memory for some time, this is only working if you have requests like one after the other in a very fast sequence. But if you have different requests, that instance is no longer there. So in this case, well, with a Java application that takes 260 milliseconds to start, definitely we can think about using Java for a Lambda and not having to use Python or Go. I also have another talk comparing the Java performance with the Golang performance. And if we go to native, the performance is very similar. But the ecosystem is not the same. I've been working for 1 year with Go, and definitely I was missing a lot of things. So It's 260 milliseconds compared to almost 4 seconds. But to be fair, there's Spring Native. So you can also try to use the latest versions of Spring, and they claim that they can move your application into a native artifact too. I've tried, but I didn't succeed on doing this migration of the application into a native artifact. But definitely, you also should try a Spring Native as an alternative. I'm wrapping down the presentation, and I will share some references that if you want to check them, here are the links for the project, the fork with my code migrating the Spring application into the Quarkus application. In the README, there are lots of steps for all of the things that I did in order to migrate the application. And also, if you want to know more about Quarkus. If you want to learn more about Quarkus, they also have interactive tutorials online. If you go to developers.redhat.com, you will find lots of free tutorials that you can use. And you don't even have to install anything. So everything happens on the cloud. You have an IDE, you can code, you can test, you can run, and you can follow the instructions. So it's very easy. And they have tutorials for a lot of, like, let's say, developers. Also, there's a cheat sheet that you can check with all the news about the new versions of Quarkus. So it's up to date. If you want to start a project, you can also either use the Quarkus CLI, or you go to the Quarkus website, and then you specify which are the libraries, and it will create a zip file, or even create a GitHub project with the code needed to start. They also provide like a simple test for the simple REST endpoint. But it's not only that I say that Quarkus is fine. So there are big companies that also have moved from Spring to Quarkus. One of the best examples is Vodafone. They changed a lot of microservices from Spring to Quarkus JVM in this case, but they did a big change. So also you can check these stories. There are the links where you can see why those companies decided to change. And that's all for my presentation. You have the slides QR if you want to check them. And if you want to rate me and give me some feedback, I will totally appreciate. That's all. Thank you very much. And let's see if we have questions. Does Quarkus also support Clojure? I don't know, and I've never heard of it, but I will check. Yeah, it's a good question. How can I answer? Okay, I don't know. What is Quarkus performance compared to Micronaut? Well, they are very similar. There are differences. In some cases, you can see Micronaut being faster, and in other cases, Quarkus is a bit faster. So, but they are very, very similar on the performance. I know boot time is improved with Quarkus, but what about general application performance? Let's consider Quarkus native. Okay, I have to be fair. When you go to native, I've heard that in some cases there is a lower throughput. So there are other alternatives if you want to go to faster Java. So one of them is this ahead-of-time compilation, but there are others like Crack, that what it does is that it takes a snapshot of your running application, and then every time that you spin a new instance, it will start from that moment. So all the pre-initialization process has already been done. So that's another way of doing it, and you don't need to go to a native approach. And apparently, it has better throughput results. but has all other complications because especially if you have different network connections, properties or session values, yes, it's complicated, and well, you need some coding behind. Wouldn't CDI interceptors fill in for AOP? Yes, you can use interceptors. Good question. In order to store metrics, you can have CDI interceptors that are going to intercept the call to some methods. Yes, definitely, interceptors is another way of doing it. Thank you. Quarkus is great, but from your experience, what are its pitfalls? Well, pitfalls. I don't know, I haven't found any. My experience has been nice. I didn't see anything that was against of it. Maybe one of the pitfalls is that you don't find a lot of people already using Quarkus in production. So it's hard to find developers with experience in Quarkus. So yeah, that would be a pitfall. If you want to create something now, you need to consider which players do you have in your team and which is their experience. So definitely, the less adoption is a pitfall for me. How to convince management that suddenly, from 10 years of experience in Spring, you suddenly want to become Quarkus Junior just to speed startup for 3 seconds? Well, I don't think you need to convince anyone. You need to always think about if the migration makes sense. So not always the migration makes sense. So if you have a big monolith that it is running, starts, and is there for a lot of hours, if it's working, why you need to change it? But if you are going to create new things, or you want to migrate some microservices because you have a reason to do that, it's, hey, we are going to Kubernetes, and we are going to spin pods very often, then definitely you should consider different alternatives and compare, okay, Spring Native, doing with the Spring, even considering which is the benefit if you go to a Lambda, so Knative. Then you can have an objective reason to convince your manager. And I wouldn't say you become Quarkus Junior because it's different than Spring. So if you want to start with Spring now, you need to learn a lot of things. But if you want to start with Quarkus, you just follow using standard libraries. It's not that you need to learn 1,000 annotations that are for, for Spring. This is also one of the things that I personally didn't like from Micronaut. They created things for Micronaut. With Quarkus, 99% is open source libraries that have been there for a long time. So this is also one of the differences for me compared to Micronaut. But Micronaut is an amazing solution too. How to, okay, and yeah, that's the last question. So if there are no other questions, well, thank you very much. And don't forget to take swag if you want that is here. Thank you.